I'm sure you're aware by now that Peregrine Greaves got a massive buff this season. This exotic now offers a 1000% increase in damage against champions, mini bosses, and tormentors, while also giving a full refund to your shoulder charge ability if it hits. This makes it insane for nuking champions even when under power now, allowing you to one-shot in a lot of situations even without optimal debuff setups. And against bosses like Nezarec, which is a tormentor, you can spam him to death with airborne shoulder charges hitting for almost 1,000,000 damage each time. Just to show how insane the damage scaling is when testing against Carl, a base shoulder charge is going to be hitting for 53,190 damage. Also note that the actual shoulder charge impact damage was only 39,000 damage, which is what's actually getting increased here. While Airborne and Peregrine Greaves are equipped, this now gets a 1000% increase, which is an 11x multiplier, so we now hit for 430,000 damage. An Overshield is another 100% increase, which is multiplicative, so that just doubles our damage, so we now hit for 860,000. And then finally, with a 30% debuff, the game ends up showing us hitting the damage cap, but we're actually hitting for 1.12 million. Also keep in mind, in a GM setting or any other setting where something doesn't die in one bash, or there's multiple enemies to kill in a row, you have infinite melee uptime. In Master Law sectors, I was able to kill even without a full 30% debuff in a lot of cases, which means any GM that ends up having Void Singe is likely going to also allow you to one-shot most champions with the right setup. In this video, I'm going to be going over all the abilities, aspects, and fragments, plus the mods that make the build work. But before I do, if you guys haven't already, make sure to drop a quick like and sub down below. It's 100% free, it takes 2 seconds, and it helps me out a ton. Starting things off with the build, you obviously want to be on Peregrine Greaves. When doing an airborne shoulder charge, this is a 225% increase in damage across the board, and then it jumps up to 1000% more damage if you use it against a mini boss, a champion, or a tormentor. After that, your grenades can give you a 15% increase in damage, but if nobody else is using a 30% debuff, I would recommend rocking Tractor Cannon and keeping your exotic slot open for the build. Other than that, the only major weapons I like to run are Pugilist weapons, specifically with something like Swordbreaker from Crota's End. You have Cursed Thrall as the origin trait, so we can get a melee kill, and then after that, every final blow we get causes a Cursed Thrall explosion to happen, so we can use Pugilist with Cursed Thrall to chain kill a bunch of adds really quickly and get a ton of melee energy back. Within the subclass, for your main abilities, you're obviously going to want to be on Ward of Dawn. After that, Rally Barricade just for the quicker cooldown. We're mainly using this for the overshield it provides. Obviously, we're using Shield Bash because that's where all of our damage is coming from. And then your grenade doesn't really matter. I like Scatter for killing enemies. I really like Magnetic for ease of use when applying a debuff, or Vortex for a longer lasting debuff if I know an enemy is going to be sitting still. When it comes to our aspects, first up is Bastion. We can now place a barricade down and give ourselves an overshield. That's why we're on Rally Barricade with the quicker cooldown. So we can place that down and give ourselves an overshield much more often. And the reason we want that overshield is because of our second aspect, which is Offensive Bulwark. Whenever we have an overshield or we're inside of our bubble, we get increased grenade regen, but then more important, we get a significant increase in our melee damage. It is a 100% increase, which is going to stack with everything else. So this will take any melee damage that we're dealing and just straight up double it. And then finally, we have the 4 fragments for the build. You guys could change these depending on team comp and other factors if you wanted to. This is just the general setup that I like running for solo content and team-based content as well. First up is Echo of Starvation. Anytime we pick up an Orb of Power, we get Devour. As we get kills while Devour is procced, it will extend the timer, give us grenade energy back, and it used to give full health and full shields, but it was recently nerfed so that it now only gives, I think, 100 HP back per kill while on Titan and Hunter. We still have Echo of Undermining. This is for the 15% weaken grenades. Once again, with team comp, if you have somebody constantly going around and debuffing for you, or you're doing the tractor debuff yourself, you could opt to run something instead of Undermining. In a lot of cases though, I think you can avoid running tractor, just use an Undermining grenade, get your grenade back quick enough, and that 15% debuff is more than enough to one-shot champions. Third up is Echo of Provision. This gives melee energy as we deal damage with grenades, which is nice if you just need to top off your melee, especially if you're using shoulder charge for a bit of movement, and then get it ready for a damage phase or something like that. And then finally, we have Echo of Vigilance. With this, anytime we defeat an enemy while our shields are depleted, we get a temporary Void Overshield. This is great if you're taking a lot of damage in a boss fight, can quickly get a kill, or even going up against champions to proc that 100% increased melee damage, and then go right into a Peregrine shoulder charge. On screen right now are all the mods we're using with the build. As always, there will be a dim link below, a mobalytics link, and with this build specifically and how useful and dynamic it can be in like a GM setting or even a raid setting, I think you could easily swap a lot of these mods around depending on what you're actually using it for. On my helmet, I've been rocking 2 copies of Hands On. Bubble is pretty important with the build, especially if you want that increased damage. You want to drop your bubble on a champion or a boss so that you get offensive bulwark to proc. Having higher uptime is great as we're getting those melee final blows. And then I tend to be on a void weapon in a lot of cases, something like funnel web. So for that reason, I'll rock harmonic siphon to give myself orbs to proc things like devour. On my gauntlets, we have heavy handed. This is great for spawning in orbs of power on melee final blows. This does have a 10-second cooldown, so it was pretty heavily nerfed. And even though Peregrines give a full refund when using the bash against a mini boss, a champion, or even a tormentor, there's a lot of cases where you might track to the wrong ad or use it against a boss for some extra damage. So for that reason, I have melee kickstart mods on. So this with 3 armor charge stacks and then 2 full copies is going to give a pretty significant portion of our melee back instantly if we ever lose that charge. On my chest piece, especially in GMs or any other endgame content, I would recommend running 3 copies of damage resist mods, depending on the incoming damage that you're taking. On my boots, I have on Innervation and Invigoration. This is 10% grenade energy and 10% melee energy back per orb we collect. This is great. In the case of Invigoration, if we do lose our melee, we can just pick up orbs really quickly, especially in a team-based setting. If somebody drops their super and we have orbs from that or orbs they've created, we can quickly get our charge back. And then also with stacks on stacks, this is just to keep our melee kickstart mod up high. In general, when I'm not going against a ton of different champions and I want to use this against a boss, I can be a little bit more loose and not be as afraid to lose my bash and not get a full refund. But in my opinion, if you're using this in a GM specifically, going up against champs and really focusing those champions, I would just throw on something like Recuperation. Because of the Devour nerfs, this will really help when picking up Orbs of Power so that you're proccing Devour and then still getting a full amount of HP back pretty much. And then finally, on our class item, we have Outreach, Bomber, and then Reaper. We're using our class ability pretty often with the build for that overshield, so we can drop this, get a weapon final blow to create an orb and proc Devour through Reaper, and then obviously get energy for our grenade and melee back very quickly if we ever lose our melee, and to just keep our grenade uptime high as we're dropping that class ability. Overall, I think this build is insane and it has a ton of potential depending on the GM lineups that seasons have. The only major downside I see, and something that would be a really good change in my opinion, would be keeping the 1000% increased damage against all bosses. To me, it seems a bit odd that only mini bosses, champions, and tormentors get the increased damage. I think the melee refund makes sense just against these enemy types, because if we got refunds for all bosses, it would end up being a bit broken. But the exotic would be much more well-rounded if you could use a single shoulder charge each damage phase and still do a ton of extra damage. Let me know your thoughts on Peregrine Greaves in the comments down below, and I do also stream a bunch over on my Twitch. If you guys ever want to stop by, a link to that is in my description down below. As always, have a good one, guys. Peace.